Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today, we're diving into a case that, really blew up on social media and sparked a huge conversation about justice, the death of Lauren Smith Fields.
Yeah, it's really interesting, this case, because it shows us how investigations can go wrong, when the public isn't paying attention, especially when you've got race and potential bias involved.
It's really disturbing, and we're going to be kind of unpacking a proposed podcast script that really digs into all these inconsistencies and how the public reacted, especially the African American community. And think of this deep dive not as just going back over the Lauren Smith Fields case, but as a way of understanding how investigations like this happen and the systemic problems they might show us.
Yeah, it's about who gets justice and how they get it,
Exactly. So before we get into all the details, let's talk about Lauren. Imagine this bright, ambitious 23-year-old from Bridgeport, Connecticut, and she's studying biomedical science. I mean, talk about a tough field, right? Requires a lot of brain power.
Oh, absolutely. You need some serious dedication for that. And she wasn't just studying. Lauren was, building a presence online, as a beauty and fitness influencer. This is a young woman with goals, someone who is shaping her own future. Which
is what makes everything that happened, even more tragic. It all starts on December 11th, 2021. Lauren's got a date. She's meeting this guy, Matthew LaFountain, someone she met, the usual way these days, on a dating app.
Right. Seems normal. But this detail, it becomes the center of everything. LaFountain's the last one who saw Lauren alive. He's the one who called 911 when he found her, unresponsive in her apartment. You'd think that alone, that'd be a huge red flag, possible crime scene, right?
Right. You'd think so. But the police, they weren't exactly rushing, were they? In fact, LaFountain, he's released pretty quickly, and there are even reports of the police calling him a nice guy.
Yeah, that's all right, not something you should say. It really makes you question if they were being objective early on in the investigation. I mean, you'd think they'd be extra careful at that point, right? Gather all the evidence, not make judgments about people's personalities.
Absolutely. But what's even worse, maybe, is that Lauren's family, they weren't even told about her death by the police. They found out, can you believe this? 2 days later on their own. It's unbelievable.
I mean, that just shows you how they saw the case at the beginning, how they handle it, or didn't handle it, really. A young woman found dead in her apartment and her own family doesn't even get told right away. It's just awful.
And it's this mess up at the start that would lead to so much anger and distrust, especially, within the African American community. Because when you really look at how it all happened, it's hard not to see, this pattern, this awful trend.
And that's where the whole idea of missing white woman syndrome comes in. People debate it, analyze it, but at its heart, it's about something very real and very messed up. It's this idea that, when a young white woman goes missing, it gets way more attention, way more resources from the media, from the police than, other missing person cases.
Yeah, it's there's this hierarchy of tragedy, and in some cases they just capture everyone's attention, right? They become these big stories, while others they get ignored.
Exactly. And the sad thing is there's so much data that backs this up. They've done studies and they show that when it's a woman of color who's missing or murdered, it just doesn't get the same coverage, the same public outrage, even the same effort from investigators. It's really disheartening.
Which is why what Lauren's family did, especially her mom, Chantel Fields, it was so crucial. She was amazing.
Oh, absolutely. Chantel, she just refused to let her daughter's death be ignored, brushed under the rug. She became like a force of nature. She used her voice and she demanded answers. She demanded a real investigation from the Bridgeport police. Talk about a strong woman.
She really went up against the system, and it felt like, at first they just weren't taking her seriously. Chantel, she went public, she got a lawyer, she got people talking about it on social media. You can't deny the impact of what she did.
It's a tough thing though, right? On one hand, it's inspiring. It shows you how much power we have when we come together, when we demand justice. But on the other hand, it's just sad that it takes so much effort, so much fighting to get justice for victims, especially when they're from marginalized communities. It shouldn't be this hard.
It makes you think, how many other families, how many other victims are out there, and their cases are they're forgotten because they don't have a Chantel Fields fighting for them. Yeah. It's really sad to think about. And as the spotlight finally lands on Lauren's case, all these inconsistencies start popping up, these really questionable details. Remember the toxicology report we mentioned?
Oh, yeah, the one that showed fentanyl, promethazine, hydroxine, and alcohol in her system. Yeah, that's where things get, well, very interesting.
Because if you go with what LaFountain said happened that night, he only mentioned alcohol,
Yeah.
right? So how do we explain the other stuff, especially the fentanyl?
That's the big question, isn't it? And it's a question with some serious weight to it. Fentanyl, that stuff is potent. Even tiny amounts can be dangerous. You don't just accidentally take that and not know it, especially not enough to, potentially kill you.
Which makes you really question LaFountain's story, right? It's not like he just forgot a minor detail or something. The fentanyl, the fact that he never mentioned it, it just raises so many red flags about what really happened that night.
Absolutely. And to make things even more complicated, there's the whole issue of the crime scene itself. Like we said earlier, the police response, it wasn't exactly what you'd call, by the book. And it seems like they didn't really treat it like a potential crime scene right away.
You're telling me?
Yeah.
From what we've gathered, it's possible that crucial evidence, it's gone, compromised, because of how badly they messed up.
Securing the scene, preserving evidence, that's like step one in any investigation, right? And they dropped the ball, plain and simple. It just adds another layer of suspicion to the whole thing. You can't help but wonder what they missed, what could have been crucial to understanding what happened to Lauren.
It's like they started the investigation all wrong, and they never really recovered from it. You combine that with how they waited to tell Lauren's family, the way they dismissed LaFountain as just a nice guy, the fact that the media didn't even care at first.
But it's a recipe for disaster for people to lose faith, especially on African-American community. This case, it might not have been intentional, but it shows you these systemic problems, these deep issues in our justice system,
It makes you realize that bias, even when people don't mean it, it can still affect how victims are treated, how cases are handled. It really makes you wonder, like, how many other cases, especially, when it's someone from a marginalized community, how many are just like swept under the rug just because they don't get the same attention, the same outrage.
It's a scary thought, and it makes you ask, like, what can we actually do? How do we fix these deep problems in law enforcement? How do we make sure that every victim, no matter who they are, where they come from, they're treated with respect, with urgency, that the investigation is done right?
Yeah, it's a question people keep asking, right? Sadly, it seems like it takes a tragedy for us to even talk about it. And there aren't any easy answers, but I think with this case, what it shows us is that we have to keep talking about it. We have to keep pushing for change, for real reforms.
100%. We need transparency. We need the people in charge to be held accountable. We need better training for law enforcement, more comprehensive, and maybe most importantly, we need a change in how we think.
Exactly. We have to acknowledge that bias, it exists even when we don't realize it, and it affects how we see things, how we judge. And we have to remember that every single life, it matters.
Yeah.
Every story deserves to be heard. Every case deserves a real investigation, one that's fair, impartial, and truly focused on finding out the truth.
That's it. That's the heart of it. And that's what makes Lauren's story and how hard her family fought so incredibly important. They were so brave to bring these uncomfortable truths to light, to force us to face them.
They refused to let Lauren be forgotten. And by doing that, they started a conversation that goes way beyond Bridgeport, Connecticut, a conversation about justice, about equality, and about making sure that what happened to Lauren never happens again.
And it's a conversation we all need to be a part of, asking the hard questions, holding the system accountable, never settling for less. Because justice delayed, justice denied, it's not justice at all.
Couldn't have said it better myself. And on that note, we've reached the end of another deep dive. But before we go, we want to leave you with something to think about. What can you do in your own life, in your community, to fight for justice? To make sure that everyone's voice is heard, that cases like Lauren's, they don't get ignored, they don't get dismissed.
It's a question worth asking yourself, because real change, lasting change, it starts with us.
Until next time, stay curious, stay informed, and keep asking those important questions.